Thank you guys so much for talking with us today. I'm so excited about this documentary, this film. I watched it and I loved it. And then I invited friends over and had them watch it and they loved it. At first, I want to ask what inspired you guys to explore the topic of miracles in investigating the supernatural?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Jared dive in after, but I think, this is an area that we both have intrigue in, and it's something, CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network audience is, very invested in. And so we were brainstorming different ideas, and, Jared came up with an amazing idea for, a TV series that we'd sort of look at different issues, heaven and hell, angels and demons, miracles from a journalistic sort of investigative perspective. And as soon as we started kind of getting into the filming of it, and Jared, fill in any blanks here, but it became very apparent that, once we started looking at miracles, you can't tell that miracle story in 30 minutes. You really need, an hour and 13 minutes to unpack it in a really compelling way.
Mm, yeah, and I'll just chime in too and just say, for me personally, like miracles was I didn't grow up a Christian. I didn't become a
Mm.
Christian until I was, in my late teens, 18, 19, 20. And one of the catalyst moments for me in my faith was witnessing a couple miracles and just kind of my mind being open to the reality of miracles. And so for me, kind of circling back now, and telling a documentary about this, it's very personal for me because if miracles are real, then God's real. And I think that, looking at modern day miracles is a really powerful subject in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Wow, that's okay. We're gonna have to circle back around to that at some point. But I wanted to ask you, Jared, as director and producer and writer, how did you balance presenting miracles from a critical perspective while also respecting the personal testimonies and beliefs of those featured?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's always such a juggle, especially telling these true stories too, because, the thing about the documentary format and what's so powerful about this is, I mean, these are 100% real. Like we're not cooking these up. We're not making these into something more. These are the real, true stories. And that's what I love about the documentary format in dealing with faith-based stuff because, you know, when you tell real stories and you have credible medical documented miracles, it's a powerful thing. And so, it's kind of a writer, director, producer's dream because I don't have to embellish anything. It's like it's there. I mean, we've got video of this miracle happening. We've got the medical documentation. We got eyewitness accounts. And so, it's always an interesting journey as you're weaving those together. But it was such I mean, it's just all the stories are so dramatic just naturally. So it makes it a really easy and exciting thing to kind of put together.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I think Jared, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but how did your personal, for both of you, how did your personal beliefs shape the way you approached this film? Like, where were you coming from on the spectrum of believing in miracle in modern day miracles?
For me, kind of like what I was saying was from my personal perspective, I had already kind of accepted the reality of miracles. But at the same time, I had never really like went and like, let's look at the medical documentation for these things. I mean, there's trusted people that I know who've experienced things. I've seen things. I prayed for people and seen miracles. And so for me, like I know it's real, but I also haven't like dug up medical documentation. And so for me, I kind of came from that perspective, but Billy kind of came from a bit of a different perspective, and I'll let him kind of share about that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because coming into this, it's one thing to say you believe things or to say, and I did believe them. So I don't want to say I didn't, but you have experience and you have belief, right? And a lot of times experience and belief don't necessarily come together in a way that can back up one another, where you could say, well, I've seen people have these healings. I believed it was possible. I've been a Christian my whole life. And so going into it, having those beliefs, but kind of being rocked and shaped quite a bit during it because it brought me into totally new arenas that I hadn't really been confronted with. It's really easy when you work in media and journalism or these different areas to say, well, I believe that, but I'm separated from it. I'm back here from it. And so I don't have to really engage in it because I'm just talking about it or I'm presenting it. And so that was my experience with a lot of miracle stories until we got into this. And it required a different level of investigation, a different level of vetting those stories. And then, for me, I think from a spiritual perspective, being challenged to rethink, where have I gone wrong? Where am I missing things maybe in this process? Because we went in as Christians, but skeptically in a way that allowed us, I think, to navigate this and say, we want you to really show us that this is true, prove to us that this is true. Don't just tell us. And we wanted to convey that to the audience too. But it did that for me in a way I wasn't expecting, to be honest with you. And even now, I'm still processing through it. And it's very positive what that means for my own faith.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, I mean, was there any particular miracles? Because all the stories were amazing and they just kept getting more and more amazing the more you dove in and really dissected almost how many miracles had to happen for just this one, encompassing miracle that happened in each of these in everyone's lives. So was there a particular miracle or supernatural event that happened that had a lasting impact on you during your research?
Mm. I I think for me, all of them did. I think going into filming, the idea that somebody would be dead for 40 minutes and that they would be alive and able to be interviewed in a documentary, I think, that for me, it wasn't I didn't believe it. It's like in your mind, you're thinking, okay, well, what am I not hearing about this story? What am I missing? What am I going to find right when I get there? But I knew going in because we had vetted. I mean, Jared did a brilliant job of vetting and I would look over things and we knew what we were going into. But that story in particular was interesting because, as you were saying, there's so many other miracles attached to these miracles. It's not just one thing. And so I think, and that was Jeff Markin. He was deceased for 40 minutes. They called his death the emergency room doctor, Dr. Chauncey Crandall, who was there that day. He leaves the room because they're going to bring the body to the morgue, right? And so, without spoiling every detail of the story, you have a situation where this man who had been pronounced dead, this doctor, and this is another one of the miracles, is called back to go pray by God, to go and pray for this man. And he prays for him. They revive him. He comes back to life. And we were able to interview him. I mean, if you can get a pulse back on somebody who's been dead for 40 minutes, you would expect they'd be in a vegetative state. He was not. After a couple of days, he wakes up and we interview him later on, years later about this experience. So that for me really made me rethink. Again, I believe that was possible. We see it in scripture. We know it's true, but to be sitting across from a dead person come alive was very shocking for for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I loved that when I went into it. Yeah, I didn't know any of the miracles. And then I kind of was like you, I think. I was kind of waiting for the ball to drop or, the shoe to drop to where I was like, oh, okay, but it was a glitch in the machine or oh this. And it wasn't, just kept getting more and more miraculous as time went on.
Can I add
Um,
one more thing? I want to add this because
yeah.
with that story, without spoiling too many details, it also comes out of the doctor's story, which is a miracle that doesn't happen, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's something that made that even more compelling to me, that God could take a moment in somebody's life and then connect them later on to all of these incredible miracles, including that one. So processing through that in this journey too of how do you make sense of those moments where we don't get the result we want on this side of eternity?
Yeah. Yeah, that is so true. Um, how do you approach skepticism both in yourself and others when it comes to supernatural events or miracles?
Even though I've witnessed these things personally, I think Billy will attest to this as well. I'm very skeptical, and I come into these things not believing people, but when you're vetting stories for a documentary that's investigating modern day miracles, I mean, you've got to have ironclad stories. And so for Billy and I, as we were kind of digging into this, we really, got down to the foundations of these stories. What are the medical documentation? What did that say? What are the doctors saying about this? And I think it's really important to be skeptical. And something else I want to say too is like it's okay to like keep your brain on. I feel like so many people with miracles or faith, and they feel like they're supposed to turn their brain off and that skepticism is a bad thing. But I think it's actually important to have a certain level of skepticism.
Mhm.
Now, there's different levels of that, and sometimes people can, have way too much skepticism. But I think it's important to have a certain amount of it, not to believe everything that's said, to investigate things for ourselves, to not be gullible. But I do think it's important that we analyze things and we don't always take everything at face value. That being said, we live, in America, which kind of embraces a worldview called naturalism, which really kind of discounts miracle stories even before they listen to the evidence.
Mhm.
Oh, well, that's against science, that's ridiculous. So we throw that out. And it's like, well, no, no, no. Why don't you actually look at what the evidence is first? And so that I think that's an example of too much skepticism. So I do think there's a certain amount that's good and important to even have as a Christian.
Yeah. No, I would second that too, because I think, we live in this era where you either fall on one side or the other. It's like you're either going to throw everything out and say none of it's true, or you're going to embrace every single thing without questioning it. And I think as from a Christian perspective, right, pulling out of the journalism side of things into the Christian perspective, which is the most important perspective, we have to be truthful and we should be making sure that things we're conveying are based on truth instead of just saying, oh, it's all true because they said it. Well, we had to go in and really vet and look at details because, as Jared was saying, we wanted to make sure that we had the best possible cases, the strongest cases that would, I think, to all of the different groups of people. You have Christians who believe in miracles, Christians who aren't really sure miracles exist anymore. Then you have the atheists and the secularists, that all of those groups could be met with stories that would challenge them, or for the first group, inspire their faith more. And so that was important for us. But I do think we need to approach everything with a healthy bit of skepticism. So for me, that was kind of how I went into it, thinking, prove it to me. Like I was always a little bit like, okay, you were dead for 40 minutes, but were you really? And when you start to see that the documentation does back that you have tumors disappearing and paralysis disappearing, and by the way, not happening for any of these people, and I think this is an important detail that really did not stick out to me until we were done filming almost, which was that these people fought for miracles. They did not get them on the first try. They didn't get them on the first prayer or the first prayer event. And that's a whole other conversation, and we can talk about it if you want, but that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I was going to mention that how, because the one story, I'm trying not to give, I don't want to give anything away. Um, but the
Welcome to
one
our
man,
problem.
I know, the one of the examples, one of the stories, he talked about how he wasn't even asking for it. That was really his wife. That was, her belief, like, no, this can happen. Come do this. And it was repeated over and over and over again. I, what I want to know is, have you ever, in your own lives, have you ever personally experienced something like that, where it was a miracle or a prayer answered that you're like, I can't really explain it, but it did happen.
Yeah. I mean, well, and this is the funny part coming from having said, well, I hadn't seen a lot of these things happen. We all have these moments, right? And they may not be big medical miracle moments, but we have these things happen that at moments. Like my daughter had gotten a diagnosis that was really upsetting, the scoliosis diagnosis. I was in the car. I was like crying out to God, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to navigate this? And I was literally saying to him, like, just give me some kind of sign that this will be okay, right? And I looked up, and in front of me, on the truck in front of me, and I didn't remember this until last week when I was doing interviews. It was kind of interesting in this story, was a Bible verse in the back of this truck that immediately spoke to that it would be okay. And it gave me immediate peace. And I knew in my
Yeah.
spirit that was God, right? Now, an atheist is going to say that's not true, but what are the odds? Like I live in New York, there aren't a lot of trucks driving around with Bible verses, on them. And so there's that. And I think even while we were filming this, experiencing some things with my daughter that were clearly miraculous and incredible with her own healing that we could talk about, but that didn't again dawn on me until we really sat down and we took a breath to realize. So yeah.
Just kind of when you start talking, which I think it's one of the reasons why it's so important for people to watch this documentary, is there's something that happens when you start talking about the miracles that have happened in your lives and you start recognizing them, and it's like you'll hear someone else's and it jogs your own memories of when miraculous things happened, or like, oh, this amazing thing happened, or like, maybe it wasn't medical miracle, but it was something that was so outside of myself, so unexpected, and it brought me, like you said, immediate peace. So I'm so excited about that. um I'm curious, do you think the way society views miracles has changed at all, and how did that influence your approach in this film?
Yeah, I definitely think that the approach and the way our culture and society looks at miracles has changed. I would go back pretty far to the Enlightenment, when things were really focused, starting to pivot toward more science and away from faith and super belief in the supernatural. Some of the people we interviewed, Dr. Craig Keener, different people, they have some really great teachings and give some really good perspective on kind of where that came from. But, I think, like I was saying about naturalism, that our culture really, um, does not accept miracles, um, on the surface. And that's one of the things I kind of wanted to get into too, is one of the things that Billy and I found out as we were looking at polling data. And ironically, 80% of Americans believe that there's a supernatural dimension to reality. That seems really high to me. And when we started doing the research, I was like, why does it not feel that way? The polling data is saying that, why does it not feel that way? And, a big part of that comes from academia, and the dominant kind of worldview and culture, that's kind of propagated really looks down upon that. But if you
Yeah.
ask the majority of Americans, they would agree, oh, 100%. And that's ironically something that we're finding as we're marketing, and we after we've released this documentary, is so many people are sharing their miracle stories online. They're sending them to Billy. We're hearing all sorts of amazing stories, and really the majority of comments is, oh, I know miracles are real. I've had one in my own life. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
numbers don't lie. And the other thing that's really interesting too is that, this is not like, if you look outside of America and Western culture, I mean, the belief in the supernatural is even higher than that. And so it's very interesting when you actually start looking at the data, what you find out about this. Billy, I don't know if there's anything you'd add to that.
Yeah, well, I think too, it remains to be seen what's going to happen next because everything you just said is true. That the numbers are true, and I'm interested to see if we get more up-to-date numbers as these things are shifting. Because you're watching these revival moments on campuses. Not everybody wants to call it revival, but you're seeing a campus of 30,000 students having 7,000 students show up to worship at an event is pretty remarkable, and we're seeing this again and again and again. So because all these people are coming to faith, miracles are, they point to God, right? They're an evidence of God and truth. And so I think you're going to see more interest in this in certain pockets, especially young people, as young people are turning the tide. And there's about to be, a whole new slew of research coming out from the American Bible Society, and we don't know what it's going to say. But I did have the research head on recently for an interview, and he was telling me it's going to be very encouraging, which, so it'll be very interesting to see, with those shifts, how beliefs in miracles and other such topics will also maybe coincide and grow with that.
Yeah, that's that's so encouraging and so exciting. And it's funny, like what you're talking about, like the tide turning, and especially younger people. I feel like it's more and more I'm seeing, Wall Street Journal do articles about Christianity, and different places where I'm like, what is happening? And they have friends that have, grew up very staunchly atheist, and they're talking about miracles that have happened. And they're like, I think there's a God. I think it's Jesus, and I don't know how to react to it and how to start. So I was excited to send this documentary their way and be like, no, it's okay. You're not crazy. It's
It's happening. You're not alone. You're not
yeah,
alone. There's
it's
a lot of
happening.
people. Yeah.
You're not alone. And look at these like very logical people walk through it, walk you through it so nicely. Um, Now you guys vetted, like you said, vetted very, I mean, very thoroughly all these stories. Were there any surprising discoveries that you made when you went to head on interview these people, or when you came up and started filming, that's just surprised you?
I would say almost every one of them. I feel like anytime we you do all your research, you do all your vetting, but then when you get in front of somebody and you're having dinner with them and then you're interviewing them the next day, it's always amazing to me how much more there is to their story. I mean, and I'm a thorough researcher, I mean, I dig in and I'll read every book that I can find. If they've written numerous books, I'll watch all their interviews. And it always amazes me how much deeper their story goes, how many more miraculous elements, that were in play that you just don't know about. I mean, I could tell you even from the documentary, some of those stories, there is more. There is more to their story, but I just don't have the time, we don't have the time and we can't, tell every single detail of somebody's story. But there were elements of some of these stories where I'm like, uh, I can't include that. But, the girl who prays for Brian LaPou's hand that opens up, she had a vision of that happening, months prior and made the connection later. And she just happened to be there at this meeting and she was the one that prayed for him. And so I mean, and it's like, it's killing me. I can't include everything, but yeah, there's so much more.
I think you have, a scenario where not only is there so much more, you could do a 5 hour series, probably a 5 episode series on it, because the miracles, it's almost like a tidal wave of miracles. They extend into other miracles and other narratives around. I was most surprised, and I don't know why I was so surprised by this, but I think you hear people share their stories or you see them, and we pick stories that were not overdone. That was the other thing. Stories that maybe people hadn't heard, or they heard them in maybe siloed pockets. How affected everybody really was by their miracle. I mean, and of course you'd expect to be affected, but it's life changing for these people. It shifted the things that they do in their lives for career, even, or even some of the things that they investigate. A couple of the people we interviewed, they look at these miracle stories all the time as part of their work, right? And Dr. Crandall, he does a lot of healing ministry now, right? After what he went through. So it was life altering in a way that I think helps us process as viewers. It changed my life. I mean, it really did. I feel very different about a lot of elements of my faith after this. And my hope is that other people will feel the same as they journey through it.
Yeah, I definitely was affected watching. There was definitely a difference between before me watching it and after me seeing it and watch those things. Have you guys ever experienced, I know Jared, you have, which I want to hear more of, but maybe early on in your faith or, at any point where you heard about a miracle or you witnessed a miracle, I should say you witnessed a miracle and it just changed you and it really deepened your faith or ignited your faith.
Yeah, for me, I think growing up, I heard stories, but again, I didn't grow up in the Christian faith, and so I would hear stories about miracles, but they were always far off, distant, almost like a legend. Like you're not hearing firsthand accounts, you're hearing second, third, fourth. And so, I would hear these stories and I was just like, okay, that's a nice story. But I don't think I ever really was super affected, by any of that. It wasn't until I was, 18, 19, I ended up at this Christian conference. There was a little girl who her knees were bent inwards, and they prayed for her on the stage. And in front of all of our eyes, this little girl ran around the stage. She couldn't run before. Her knees wouldn't allow that. And she goes running
Wow.
around the stage. And I remember standing in the audience thinking to myself, how did nobody else know about this? Why did I not know about this? If this is real, which it really seems that it is, then God is real. And if God is real, nothing else matters. Like, what are we doing? And so I kind of had this like, I didn't have a grid for it, and it took me a while to process through a lot of the things that I witnessed after that, many other miracles. And so yeah, those are some of the ones that have really that's one that really stood out to me and resonates with me to this day. Is that God does still move in that way. I think sometimes we just don't expect it or we don't pray for it, we don't ask for it in the moment, or we don't press in and persevere. And I think that's one thing in this documentary. These people were desperate. They persevered. They didn't give up. And it's challenged me, and I'm like, I need to learn that level of perseverance and not give up so easily, to keep pressing in and keep asking God. The widow's mite story comes to mind, where, you just keep asking.
Yeah. No, I love Jared's story there because that visual of seeing it, right? And sometimes we need to see it. I mean, thank goodness, thank God he's patient with us, because I know for me it's like, how many times you have to tell me the same thing before I'm gonna get it. And I think very similarly, but different in some ways to Jared, saying that I believe something and then actually believing it are two different things. And I could think that I believe in miracles, but do I really? Would I persist the way that Jared was just talking about? I think for me, and Jared knows this because we talked a lot about it. I mentioned before my daughter's scoliosis and the difficulties of that when she went from being completely normal, so we thought with no issue, to having this 34-degree curve at 6 years old. And this is 3.5 years ago now, before we started this project. It was really a little traumatizing. She was in a brace 21 hours a day, full torso brace, very little breaks with that brace. And having to sort of go to the doctor, hear all this information, leave, and feel very hopeless. And I remember thinking, I said to my wife, like, I don't feel good about just going every 6 months and doing a scan and checking her back. Like, what else can we do? I like to fix things. So I'm like, what else can we do? Right. So I wasn't at the prayer point yet necessarily, but we started praying about where to go. And we found somebody who could do traction and other things that might help her. And the point is, it led me to a place where, while it started overlapping with this project, where we're working on this project, and I started laying my hands on her and praying. That wasn't something I had really done before in my life, right? And so it shifted my thinking entirely. And then a month before we were putting the documentary out, we had her last scan, and they could barely detect scoliosis. Her spine is so straight right now that she's out of her brace 100%. It's wild, and I didn't even connect the dots on that part of this journey. I know this sounds silly until, like, oh my gosh, we're talking about miracles and we're experiencing one. And I think it was a mixture of prayer for sure. It was definitely God, because people don't see those results, and the places he led us for extra help in that process. So it's giving me a totally different thought process on how I would approach this in the future, I guess, is my point.
Those both are incredible, incredible testimonies. And again, I'm so excited for this documentary because I noticed a difference in myself. I mean, Billy, like you said, like with yourself, seeing the difference before and after. And so I'm so excited for many, many people to see this film. Are there any plans for future films like this? Are there going to be sequels? Are there director's cuts? Are there, series? Is there like how many more
Yeah.
can we get?
Yes. Well, right now I will say this. So Investigating the Supernatural is a documentary series as like an umbrella. And so the next one we're working on is investigating the supernatural, angels and demons. And we're going to investigate the spiritual realm, angels, demons. We're going to take a deep dive into that. We're pretty much wrapping up the script right now for that one. And I will say, this one's very exciting, and
It is.
there's some stuff in this that is going to blow people's minds. You think science, how do you look at this scientifically? But it's some really interesting data we found, and stories that are really fascinating by people who are super academics too. So these aren't just these random people who've got a wild story. These are super credible people who've went to Princeton, Yale. So that's the next one, and then hopefully we've got a couple more in the works.
That's the hope. That
I
is the
mean,
hope.
That's the
on
hope.
that note, can you tell us where we can watch this documentary and where we can go to keep up to date for when the next Angels and Demons comes out?
Yeah, absolutely. So cbn.com/supernatural is where you can go. You can stream it. If you still like to get DVDs, you can get DVDs. But it's streaming there, and we would love for people to check it out. And we've been welcoming people too. I've said go to my website, billyhallowell.com. We have a contact form there. And if you have a miracle story you want to share, I've been so encouraged. Like Jared was mentioning, the stories that have come in, even on social media, people are posting their stories or teasing them. And I'm like, I need to know more. Tell me your story. But people have been writing in and sharing their miracle stories. We want to hear them and we welcome them. But the site again to watch is cbn.com/supernatural.
If you enjoy videos that follow your values like ours and you want to help us continue, go to movieguide.org/donate, because we're actually a nonprofit. You may not know that, but we're working in Hollywood every day to help families have more choices that follows their values. And also subscribe right now.